Thank you. So we're back again, and now I'm going to read the first paper of the day. It's fairly brief, but also very dense. And then we'll have a discussion amongst the people who are here after the paper has been read. And we look forward to your comments, that we can use what you say in our discussion. So the first paper is, What is Behaviourism? Behaviourism is a theory of learning acquired by experiences of fear or pleasure. Behaviourism heralds the age of evidence-based research. At the turn of the last century, inspired by materialistic perspectives, for example Darwin's theory, psychologists were attempting to disprove research by introspection. Introspection was the way that psychologists at the time were talking about how to discover experience, so referring to your own experience. So, from results mainly demonstrated by animal experiments, for example in the early years of behavioral experimentation, Pavlov in 1903 reinforced dogs' anticipation of food with the ringing of a bell. We have a little dog here. Positive reinforcement is the ringing of the bell, so that when he rang the bell, the dog salivated. This experiment marked the practice of conditioning. For example, a wealth of experiments were conducted that nowadays would not be approved for ethical reasons. If you have the stomach for it, you can watch videos on YouTube of J.B. Watson conditioning little Albert to be afraid of a rabbit by simultaneously producing a frightening noise. This is negative reinforcement when introducing the rabbit. And this was done in 1920. So in 1901, behaviourists Woodworth and Thorndike had demonstrated learning may be situation specific. That means learning in one field doesn't transfer to learning in another. However, Thorndike later found that cats learned from experience, becoming more adept at escaping his puzzles over time. I just have this picture of these cats escaping everywhere. Skinner also demonstrated this, saying, once rats learned how to prevent unpleasant experiences by touching a switch to avoid electrical stimuli, they went on to repeatedly touching the switch without further reinforcement. This experiment was in 1938. Thus, strict behaviorists believe that all behaviors are the result of experience, and any person, regardless of his or her background, can be trained to act in a particular manner given the right conditioning. This was a quote from Cherry in 18. I presume that's 1918. I'll check it for you. In other words, the right conditioning is when the learner learns from either an experience that reinforces a behavior or the total absence of reinforcement. Thus, methods of conditioning are either by positive reinforcement, where something is added, negative reinforcement, where something is removed, or the absence of reinforcing experiences. This is how Skinner explained it in 1953. So, we have classical conditioning, which shows learning reinforced by association For example, clicker training that is very popular now, when a reward is given at the same time as the clicker sound is produced. Operant conditioning, or instrumental learning, is when reinforcement to increase or decrease behavior is a response to the results or consequences of the behavior. So we need to remember that for later papers. In other words, learning can be demonstrated by behavioral change, and behavior can be rewarded, punished, or ignored. Thus, behavior can be strengthened or weakened. For this reason, when using conditioning to change behavior, the behavior will disappear. This is called extinction, if there are no reinforcing consequences. But when the method of reinforcement creates fear in the learner will abstain. This is called suppression, to avoid the consequences. Skinner in 1953 pointed out that punishment suppresses behavior, but because suppression is usually temporary, it may produce new and unwanted consequences. Studies of behavioral change in animals and learning outcomes offer a plethora of evidence of behaviorism's effective applications. However, the evidence supporting behaviorism is not in question, nor is the effectiveness of its application. The real question here is it an ethical approach to learning? For example, what are the consequences of conditioning for later life? In the classroom today, sanctions and praise dominate methods of classroom management. We might be warned by Seligman's thesis on learned helplessness that animals and humans unable to prevent punishment give up trying to avoid punishment and become depressed. So, when you receive this paper, you will see the references, and also I have some quotes for you on behaviorism by behaviorists. So John Watson, in his book Behaviorism in 1925, give me a dozen healthy infants, well-formed, and my own specified world to bring them up in, and I'll guarantee to take anyone at random and train him to become any type of specialist I might select. Doctor, lawyer, artist, merchant chief, and yes, even beggarman and thief, regardless of his talents, penchants, tendencies, abilities, vocations, and race of his ancestors. I'm going beyond my facts, I admit it, but so have the advocates of the contrary, and they've been doing it for many thousands of years. This is a quote from B.F. Skinner in his book Beyond Freedom and Dignity. In the traditional view, a person is free. He is autonomous in the sense that his behavior is uncaused. He can therefore be held responsible for what he does and justly punished if he offends. That view, together with its associated practices, must be re-examined when a scientific analysis reveals unsuspected controlling relations between behavior and environment. We can repeat that in discussion if necessary. This is now Michael Carson, called Feeling Our Way. When then do we punish children? Why then do we punish children? We do so for two main reasons. The first is that punishment looks like it works, even though it doesn't, because the child is inhibited in your presence. It's easy to think that they would be inhibited in your absence. Punishment produces politeness, not morality. Thus, the inhibited, obedient child inadvertently reinforces the parent's punitive behavior by acting obedient, for the sorts of parents who find obedient children reinforcing. So now we're going to move the camera and include everyone in a discussion. Any thoughts that have come up, and we'll be finishing at 11 o'clock.